Welcome to today's broadcast with World Medical Elites. Today will be educational and entertaining. We will be talking with Thomas Reilly about his educational and entertaining medical science novels. Tom has a doctoral degree in microbiology and an MBA. His career experience includes over 25 years as a scientist and executive in pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. During his tenure at the DuPont Pharmaceutical Company, he rose to lead the company's multidiscipline cardiovascular discovery group. His accomplishments there included managing the research team that discovered and developed the important antithrombotic drug Eliquis, published over 100 research articles, and invented or co-invented several patented inventions. Following his retirement from the industry, he turned to writing as a means of translating his scientific and corporate expertise into entertaining and educational novels about medical science. His first novel, Chasing Time, was reissued in March of 2023, and his second novel, Trial and Redemption, is scheduled for release very soon in April. Tom resides in Wilmington, Delaware with his wife and editor, Linda, and his website is thomasreillyauthor.com. Welcome, Tom. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Shirley. I appreciate it. And it's a particularly appropriate day, as I found out earlier, that today, March 30th, happens to be Honor Physicians Day. So it's National Honor Your Physicians Day. So hopefully that rings true for your audience today. We appreciate all the great work physicians do, and certainly your work on their behalf, Shirley.
Oh, that's very cool. That is a special day. So tell us a little bit about yourself, especially as it relates to your scientific and medical background.
Sure, and you certainly summarized it for me, Shirley. I've been interested in science for a long time. Got my PhD a while ago and went in the pharmaceutical business, as you mentioned, and so a lot of interest in things there. I think I really kind of developed a appreciation of the research and effort it takes to develop new drugs, and also I had the great advantage of working with a lot of physicians and physician groups who would work on some of our projects with us and help support our efforts in advancing new drugs. So I think I got to learn perspectives in my work, not only from the researcher on the bench, but from the patients who eventually would hopefully take our meds, and certainly from the physicians who would prescribe our meds. And that kind of threefold viewpoint, I really think has always driven me, and certainly driven me in my writing as well. But I appreciate all three viewpoints. I did also on the side get an MBA, so I sort of picked up the business side as well, which I think can only help as well. No matter how we slice it, so many of our healthcare practices are obviously businesses. So appreciating that from any perspective, including my biotech perspective, was helpful at all. And then, as you mentioned, since retiring, I've tried to utilize my, I think, communication skills, which always were a strong point for me, in writing and in teaching. I do some teaching on the side at local colleges in scientifics, and I always enjoy that, especially giving students real world experience about the medical field. And I think that's so important. I'm really proud of a lot of the students I've mentored over the last few years who've gone on to med school and dental school, even vet school and physician's assistant school, and they've really been moving to me in attributing some of their motivation toward the courses I've taught. So I've enjoyed that. And then secondary to that is my writing, which again, I think is a form of my communication. I've always thought I've been a pretty decent writer. I don't pretend to be any Ernest Hemingway or something like that, but really trying to express complicated, particularly as it relates to the medical or scientific field, very complicated concepts in a somewhat clear way that even a layperson can understand. And those are the kinds of things that drive me now as I continue writing, try and get across, hopefully, key scientific concepts in an entertaining and an educational concept. That's sort of what I focus on. And as I said, I am retired now. I spend a lot of time writing. I have 4 children, and now I have 4 grandchildren as well. So it's fun to stay active with the kids. And as I mentioned earlier, I should say you did, Shirley, my wife, who happens to be an English teacher and of several years, is a great editor for me, and I've certainly taken advantage of her great skills in advancing my novels as well. So
Mm.
that's a quick background. And as you said, I do live in Wilmington, Delaware, where I've been stationed for the last almost 40 years now. Originally, I am from Brooklyn, New York.
Ah, and both of these books are medical fiction. What prompted you to turn to write books in medical fiction?
Yeah, that's really a good question, Shirley. From my perspective, I always go back to something I've read about many times from authors and author wannabes, and it's an old saying, write what you know.
Hmm.
I've had some good ideas. I've thought about good fiction stories. I've run them by friends and family over the years, and I thought, well, they'd be a good concept, a good principal topic, perhaps, for an interesting fiction book. Even though it may not be strictly medical, I wanted to combine those concepts with what I knew, which was the medical field. And I felt in doing so, I could bring a certain level of expertise to the subject matter that perhaps we don't often see in a lot of fiction books. Even though there is a magical fantasy element in my books, they revolve around a time bending key, there's really a overriding theme of realistic medical aspects from the patient's perspective, from the researcher's perspective, from the physician's perspective, from the company's perspective, that is a company that develops and markets a drug. And I want to bring that level of reality around the whole medical field to my book. So combining it with that fictional element, I thought was a great way to both entertain and educate, which really are my sort of two-pronged approach in why I write.
Did you want to elaborate on the central themes of your books? I believe you
Sure.
just
And
mentioned
I would also add on that point in terms of some of the themes, I've admired some of the really impressive scientific and medical doctors who write fiction. And I've always found that to be, and nonfiction as well, I should say, but an individual like Lisa Genova, who's written moving stories about Alzheimer's and ALS, I think, and in such a graphic and moving way, it really prompted me to try and do the same thing. So in terms of those are encompass some of the central themes that my books entail. And as I said, not trying to pretend I'm a Ernest Hemingway or someone of that nature, but my books do have general, or I should say, broad central themes around things that we all deal with on a everyday basis almost. The themes of diligence, redemption, friendship, family relationships, loyalty. So those are very important and overriding themes. But digging within, there are numerous sub-themes in my books that really relate specifically to the medical field. Sub-themes such as the challenges of drug development and drug discovery, the exciting prospects of new medical research for uncovering therapies that might treat unmet clinical needs, the struggles patients and their families deal with when they're dealt a serious diagnostic blow by having diagnosed with a serious or perhaps incurable disease. Knowledge, the guidance, the support offered by physicians in treating these patients, and even a sub-theme around some unscrupulous pharmaceutical or biotech executives and how they might play the system for their own personal advance. And perhaps most of all, the sub-theme of really the altruistic nature of most healthcare providers in this country, physicians, nurses, staff, caretakers, researchers. I've been around so many of them in my career, and to a person, virtually all of them are altruistic in their efforts to make this society better for the patient, for society as a large. And that really perhaps is a real central theme that hopefully will come across in my books.
Interesting. So what message or messages can physicians take from your books?
Well, I think there are a lot, and that really really comes across with the sub-themes I was talking about earlier, Shirley. There's a saying, actually, I'm quoting a physician who works in this AMA Step Forward program, which is a collection of information to really help physicians with their practices that I've come across. And this doctor said there's an effect of literature on physicians that nothing else can have. And I read that quote and I'm thinking about it. What does he mean? There is an effect of literature on physicians that nothing else can have. And in thinking about that important quote that he said on this AMA's Step Forward site, I think it really relates to a lot of important things. One is really building the empathy, improving the empathy for patients by presenting for physicians by presenting different experiences and viewpoints. And I think that's what fiction can do. I think also another message is the importance of new information, new research modalities, new emerging therapeutic techniques and biotechnologies that can hopefully provide advances for the treatment of these up to now intractable diseases. I know we just live in a wonder world when we think about these themes of genetic engineering, gene therapy, stem cell therapy, neurogenesis, or the production of new neurons. But these are actively researched and in some cases early clinical stage efforts involving major technologies that would treat up to now totally intractable diseases. So if I could provide any sense of this new information to physicians, these new technologies, I think that will serve an important purpose. I think there's a few other things as well. Reading is known to improve not only your IQ, but your emotional IQ as well. And I think for physicians, that's so critical. Another really, I think, interesting study, and this goes back again to actually documented surveys and studies by different groups. It's been shown that, again, in a recent AMA study of over 500 physicians, the chances of physicians' burnout were actually significantly reduced by reading fiction for fun. I found that so amazing. Clearly, significant statistical reduction in physician burnout. We all know how busy and stressful being a physician can be, and taking care of yourself and having outlets such as reading can be extremely important. And this AMA sponsored study really seems to support that. Reading fiction for fun can really significantly reduce, or has so in this study, physician burnout. And I think on the whole, medical fiction as well can really improve the theory of the mind, the ability to comprehend viewpoints from people other than yourself. And I think by presenting different scenarios in these fiction books, that can also help to improve the theory of the mind. So those, I think, are some of the main reasons why I think medical fiction, and my books too, but certainly medical fiction, good medical fiction, can really help physicians, and it can take a lot from them. And again, I was really, really intrigued, sure, to see some of these comments, some of these points I stressed were actually backed by AMA sponsored studies. So it's not just whistling in the wind to say these things.
Important. In both books, Chasing Time and Trial and Redemption, state-of-the-art medical research is emphasized as it relates to new therapeutic regimens. Do physicians generally have the resources to follow the latest developments in medical science?
I think this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, Shirley. There are numerous sources for physicians to find out information, but they're so busy. They can be so busy, and they can be so wrapped up in taking care of their patients. There's only 24 hours in a day, and I really believe that it's a time constraint for many physicians. So I think the answer to your question is not so much the lack of resources, but the lack of perhaps time or energy required to learn those resources. Uh, I think anything one can do to help physicians in terms of understanding or appreciating perhaps some new concepts can be very useful. And going back to my pharma days and my biotech days, when we were working on brand new technologies or brand new drugs that potentially could have real important clinical benefit, we would always gather around numerous physicians to try and get their viewpoint early on, educate them about the technology, what its potential was, and get their viewpoint on how perhaps they might view it and utilize it in their practices if it ever did reach market. So I think that's the way I look at it. I think it's a constant effort for physicians, but by providing some general information, even as it is in these books on new scientific disciplines, hopefully I can just at least start in a small way to introduce some folks to some of these amazing new technologies that are actually going from the lab to the clinic as we speak. And I go back to neurogenesis, the idea of generating new neurons in the brain. Unbelievable. Up until years ago, even when I was studying in school years ago, the idea of developing new neurons in the brain was unheard of. It's thought that the neurons you're born with all develop as a youngster is all you'll ever have, and that's not true. The idea of using cell therapy, which is explored in Tron Redemption, is obviously important now for a lot of therapies. So again, maybe by just introducing some of these really latest state-of-the-art technologies, maybe I can touch some physicians' interest and educate them in just a bit. But again, I appreciate the role of physician and all they're equipped with, all they have to manage. So time is certainly constrained.
It's exciting times. In Facing Time, one of the characters is stricken by a deadly and incurable disease, ALS. As physicians, how do you manage your patients physically and emotionally who may be diagnosed with incurable diseases?
Yeah, that's really a major plot theme, I should say, of Chasing Time. And the incurable disease is ALS. ALS, I should say, commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And I knew a bit about it. I even knew a few folks who unfortunately succumbed to it. But I learned a lot in researching for Chasing Time about ALS. And one of the things that struck me was, again, dealing with the patient who has that diagnosis and his or her family and how the physicians deal with that. And again, I try to express that in Chasing Time. The physicians, both the generalist and the specialist that this patient saw, and it happens to be Anne, one of the major characters in the book, and how the physicians tried to comfort her and her husband, whose quest is, of course, to find this miracle cure for her, in dealing with this debilitating and unbelievably complex disease. And I tried to outline how the physicians would deal with those concepts based on things I've learned about how physicians deal with complicated diseases that I know patients have dealt with and what I've seen by interacting with physicians throughout my career. And again, I've just tried to express that technical skill, the medical discipline expertise, as well as the sort of psychologists that physicians have to become in dealing with these terrible, terrible situations. So I don't pretend to offer a textbook on how physicians can deal with patients in such difficult diseases, but I try to outline how I think it would happen based again on my experiences and what I've seen. And again, it's a sort of a two-prong approach, not only dealing, of course, with a physical ailment, but dealing with the emotional or mental issues of both the family and his or her caretakers, the patient and his or her caretakers in dealing with this disease, particularly where there's no cure. So I think it's a lesson really in empathy as much as anything else. And that's what I try to convey in Chasing Time.
Do you imagine that reading realistic medical fiction could offer a lesson in empathy to healthcare providers in their role with patients suffering from severe diseases?
Yeah, that's really an important point, I think. And I touched upon this earlier, Shirley, but I think empathy is really such an important skill. I know from even reading about medical school over the last several years, been more efforts in trying to focus training at the medical school level on not only physical problems, but the mental issues, the emotional issues around patients by focusing more on empathy in their education. And I think that really is expressed mostly by trying in books such as mine to present different situations, different viewpoints of people who are dealing with these diseases or these incurable diseases such as ALS. And in doing so, I think these books can hopefully provide, even as a model for some of the physicians I mentioned in my books, but sort of a model of compassion in dealing with these very difficult situations. I think it comes down to really building emotional intelligence.
Mm.
And that's really having empathy for your patients in a way that can really help and guide them through these difficult times. And how do you do that? Well, I think you provide a whole host of different situations, such as in this book. You expand their mind perhaps by providing situations that they can utilize perhaps to expand their emotional intelligence. You help them engage in new patterns of thinking, problem solving, making predictions, all things that an empathetic and capable physician must do, especially in these dire situations. All aligned to improve not only your IQ but your emotional quotient, your EQ. And I think writing and certain even fiction, certainly nonfiction as well, but certainly fiction can help if it's appropriately written do all these things. So I think these are some of the ways in which I think reading realistic medical fiction can offer a lesson in empathy to physicians. And again, I can cite some other books where I think it's done very well. And I go back to Lisa Genova and her moving books on ALS and Alzheimer's, and there are others. But you can see a lesson in empathy in reading those books. And hopefully, in some small way, I've achieved a similar kind of result in my books, particularly Chasing Time.
Well, Tom, thank you for your time today. And if you're interested in learning more about Thomas Reilly or grabbing one of or both of his books, we have the information on the slide. And if you're listening to a podcast, then go to Amazon.com to purchase the book. And more information on Tom, go to his website at thomasreillyauthor.com. And thank you for listening to our broadcast today. We invite you to comment, like, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, go to worldmedicalelites.com and claim your healthcare provider listing and review your healthcare provider. Thank you.